Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classic Cinema. Tonight's movie is 1972's The Brain Machine, directed by Joy N. Houck Jr. Let me kick this intro off by telling you this. The 1970s were the worst decade in the history of this country to come of age in. I'm not saying it was all bad. I had some really good times in that decade, discovered some great music, and made a lot of friends I still have to this day. But as far as culture goes, the hideousness of that 10-year period is unparalleled in the history of this country. One of the simpler ways of illustrating this, although I can't do it, would be to show you any of the awful movies of the week made then. In the early 70s, a national broadcasting company came up with the idea of making a series of cheap made-for-television movies that usually concerned some kind of social commentary on whatever happened to be a hot topic at the time. Hence the portrait films, such as Sarah T. Portrait of a Teenage Alcoholic, or Portrait of a Teenage Runaway, usually starring that typical teen Linda Blair. I remember one in particular that was very controversial at the time, Born Innocent, which featured a charming scene showing Miss Blair being gang raped with a toilet plunger by a bunch of dykey-looking girls. That wasn't a mop handle. At any rate, those movies pulled in a good amount of viewers, probably due to the salacious titles they chose. So the American Broadcasting Company hopped on the bandwagon and started churning out films so cheap, I'm sure Sam Arkoff of AIP was eating his shoes in envy. They grouped these D-grade movies under the portentous title, the ABC Movie of the Week, and started out by doing social issue movies like NBC. There were only so many social issues to be dealt with, however, so they filled the rest of the slots with pretty dicey science fiction films like my friend Darren's personal favorite, The Last Dinosaur, which is possibly the most ridiculous made-for-TV movie I've ever seen. These films, more often than not, starred actors like Joan Van Ark, who I believe was in every movie of the week ever made, and a lot of actors who were considered past their prime, like Richard Boone. Time was that doing television was kind of considered beneath many actors, just as when films were new, it was considered to be beneath the dignity of a stage actor to appear in movies. The term movies, incidentally, was originally coined to describe the makers of the films, not the films themselves. At the advent of motion pictures, Thomas Edison held a patent not only on the cameras, but on the film itself. He couldn't patent the film he used, but he did patent the sprocket holes, which were his idea. If you used film that hadn't been manufactured by Edison, his goons would bust your equipment and you up. This is going somewhere, so hang on. New Jersey was Hollywood before there was a Hollywood. That made sense since the money men were in, for the most part, still are in New York. It also enabled the Edison Company to keep a close eye on productions going on and enforce their patents quickly. Now, the reason the movie business moved west were twofold. One, the weather was great for about 95% of the year, and Mexico was just an hour or so south. If a movie crew heard about a goon squad in the vicinity, they'd grab their equipment and beat it out of the country where the goons couldn't reach them. Anyway, the movie crews took advantage of whatever was on hand. They'd set up in somebody's front yard and start shooting without bothering to get permission, and the property owner would come running out yelling, "Get out of here, you movies!" and chase them off. So there you go. As you probably surmised by now, there's not a lot of information available concerning this movie, but it's not a surprise considering the lack of a recognizable production company, the low quality of the cinematography, the dearth of stars, and the plethora of Southern accents. I believe, although I'm not entirely sure, that this movie belongs to the genre of films made under the banner of what I like to call Sollywood, a number of film production companies that make and distribute films exclusively in the South. According to rumor, these companies produce dozens of films that rarely, if ever, make it over the Mason-Dixon line, even on TV. They also starred actors and actresses considered past their prime, such as James Best, who starred in this movie, but they also served as a proving ground for new faces like Gerald McRaney, who also appears here. A few of them, such as The Night of Bloody Horror, popped up occasionally at the midnight movies back in the 70s. We showed Night of Bloody Horror on this very show a while ago, and judging from the response we got, none whatsoever, it wasn't exactly among the most popular films we've ever shown. Then again, very few of the movies we show are popular in any way, shape, or form, so I suppose my regular viewers are pretty much inured to the pain watching this will cause. I know half of you are going to go to bed right after the intro, but if you count yourself among the brave souls that make up the other half of my audience, you who are not exactly discerning when it comes to what you stay up to watch, you're in luck. Don't misinterpret that as my saying that this movie is worth watching. It's not. It's cheap, simple-minded, and incredibly dull. Well, you'd think that would be enough to make this movie unwatchable. There's a couple of extra added attractions. First of all, it's directed by Joy Houck Jr., whose name you'll be familiar with if you have ever seen that Ed Wood classic Jailbait on this show. And secondly, it was made in 1972. The great thing about that is I don't even have to say anything. All I have to do is show you this frame capture, and it explains everything that was horrid about the 70s. Nice, huh? Now think about seeing women that look like that everywhere. Far be it for me to appear sexist, however. Check this one out. It was just as bad for the women as it was for the men. Throw in a couple of leisure suits and you've got an excellent argument for enforced sterilization. The tagline for this movie was, "It has no conscience, it shows no mercy," which is incredibly apt for this pile of hooey. I wasn't exactly able to decipher what's going on in this movie. Every time I watched it, about 10 minutes in, I got this irresistible urge to give myself a pedicure, so I wasn't able to muster the necessary attention to follow what little plot there is in this film. For those of you who are going to bed after the intro, however, I'll give you a rundown of the plot. From what I was able to catch between hangnails, the government is funding some kind of mind control program, and one of the scientists working on it has stolen some particularly sensitive documents and must be stopped at any cost. The laboratory is, from the looks of it, in a high-rise hotel. The scientists get to the lab by taking the elevator to the basement and then walking down about 10 flights of stairs because it makes a cool-looking overhead shot. The headquarters looks as if it's somewhere in Baghdad, judging from the architecture, although every time we see the inside of the place, it's paneled in cheap fiberboard. There's some shady dialogue, and then we meet the subjects of the experiment. A 22-year-old woman who is, from her description, not too bright. A 31-year-old truck driver, bartender, carpenter, and Army veteran who, it turns out later, suffers from PTSD. A 44-year-old victim of a serious auto accident who, although it's never made clear if he was ever ordained, wears the collar of a minister. And a 26-year-old high school jock who inherited a lot of money and is pretty much aimless. None of them have any family, so of course if the experiment screws up somehow, there'll be no nosy relatives asking awkward questions. The guy that stole the files is obviously a scientist because when we see him running through the woods trying to avoid capture, he's still wearing his lab coat. You'd think the imbecile would have taken that off since a bright white knee-length coat isn't exactly what you should wear when you're trying to hide. The dimwit manages to escape somehow, but doesn't stay alive very long. The government hit squad tracks him down to some fleabag hotel and kills him, although how they recognize him without his lab coat is beyond me. All of this happens in the first 10 minutes or so. The experiments take place with the subjects laying in what I believe are some kind of exercise unit they used to sell on TV. As for the control room, there are lots of hanging wires, aerosol cans, oscilloscopes, waveform monitors, vectorscopes, and the usual 1970s type high technology that has nothing to do with computers stacked up so it looks complicated. The machine apparently probes the brain of the subject and finds out the subject's deepest secrets. For instance, the minister has had an affair with some floozy, and when that's revealed, he flips out and smashes the fail-safe control, which for some reason makes the walls start to compress. I can't go on anymore. It was bad enough having to watch this pile of crap, but recounting it is more than I could take. Let's get to the bios. James Best was born on July 26, 1926 in Powderly, Kentucky. His first role was an uncredited walk-on in 1950's One-Way Street, and he appeared in 170 movies and TV shows in his long career, including 2 appearances as Jim Lindsay, the guitar player on The Andy Griffith Show. Because of his down-home accent, he was relegated mostly to roles in westerns where he played bad guys, bumpkins, or cowards. He had a better choice of roles once he got into TV and eventually found fame as Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane in the series The Dukes of Hazzard. The less said about which, the better. An interesting bit of trivia. He's the cousin of Don and Phil Everly, a.k.a. the Everly Brothers. Gerald Lee McRaney was born August 19, 1947 in Collins, Mississippi. He's appeared in 119 movies and TV shows, starting with 1969's Night of Bloody Horror, a film regular viewers will be familiar with. McRaney began his acting career in junior high school after injuring his knee playing football and joining the drama club. He spent several years acting in small roles and making guest appearances while working in the Louisiana oil fields to support himself and his family. He got his first big break when he got the part of Rick Simon on Simon and Simon, which aired on CBS for 8 seasons. He then went on to star in and produce Major Dad, in which he played Major John D. McGillis, which ran for 4 seasons on CBS. He spent most of his early career playing bad guys or shiftless trust fund brats, but soon enough moved into leading roles. In 1981, he met and fell in love with Delta Burke when she guest starred on Simon and Simon, and when he returned the favor by guesting on her show Designing Women, they were married soon after. The plot for The Brain Machine is, I suppose, an interesting idea, but it gets mired down in paranoid conspiracy fantasies, something that was rather endemic of 70s movies, since that was the decade when public trust in the government and its various machinations took a major left turn and has been going downhill ever since. I'm not about to go off on a rant about the government, since this is primarily, and if I have anything to say about it, will remain an entertainment show. If you want to hear about conspiracies, listen to America Coast to Coast. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy The Brain Machine, right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema.